Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Soul. Great conversation with Jeff Burkow, and I think it's always great to hear what the end game looks like from the perspective of somebody who is who's an expert and has been around a long time. But speaking of end game, we obviously got to give a nod to the Florida Panthers, who just won their first Stanley Cup.
And who are they?
So now we're really going to have to,
I'm dead serious.
It's the hockey team.
Okay,
that's played on ice.
Time out. Hold on. So, Blackhawks, Chicago.
Yeah,
let's be very clear.
Correct.
There's no snow. There's no ice here in Miami. How is their hockey team?
They've figured out a way. They've figured out a way to put ice indoors now. Kyle, we're gonna catch him up on refrigeration technology in a second. But
they've been here for 30 years.
30 years. Okay. No Stanley Cups. They won the Stanley Cup, and I will say, it was a series that for those of you that follow, obviously know that the Panthers were up 3-0. The Edmonton Oilers, who they played, came back and won 3 games, and
wow.
It was a tense Game 7 for any Panthers fan, and I'm not one, but I appreciate local sports. It was an exciting game to watch and very well played by the Panthers.
I went to games 1, 2, and 5, and I was too scared.
So I text David in the first. I text David in the first period of the game, and I said, "Did you go to the game?" And he said, "Too scared." And
I was too scared.
I could see your seats were open.
And as soon as the game ended, I was like, I really should have gone.
Did they win?
They won.
They did win.
And this was that is the, by the way, classic South Florida fandom means I'll go if I'm in the mood to go.
Stop.
Well, I will juxtapose that because my Boston Celtics actually also won their championship. They won the NBA Finals against the Dallas Mavericks 4-1.
What I said, 18 or 19?
18 championships for Boston. But, getting back to our neighborhood, South Florida sports is always a little bit of a conundrum to me. Number one, I'm from Boston, so obviously there's often, a degree of rivalry, between Boston and anybody on the East Coast, and Miami, especially the Heat, have, proven to be a very formidable rival to the Celtics. But, it's interesting when we're talking about, development, we think about, things like where Marlin Stadium wound up, where the new soccer stadium is going to be, where the Dolphins play. It always felt to me like a little bit of a miss. And again, granted, I grew up in the Boston area. Fenway Park is literally in the middle of the city. There's nowhere to park, and you take the subway.
But that's the point. You have a subway. They put the Panthers Arena. They changed the arena's names.
Right.
Whatever
it's called now.
Right. But it's called a Merit, I think. But they put it out in Sunrise because people from Palm Beach County and Broward County weren't going to come to downtown Miami.
Right.
And they figured that their hockey audience was more of a Broward and Palm Beach audience.
Did the Panthers play at Miami Arena originally?
They originally played at Miami Arena. In fact, the first Stanley Cup they were in, they were at Miami Arena. And that's when, in fact, to tell a quick story, Scott Mellenby, who I think his number was 22, killed a rat in the locker room. And that's where the idea of the rats being thrown on the ice.
Not real rats,
Detroit.
Kyle. Not they're rubber. They're rubber.
Right.
Okay.
But
Kyle was like, I got to move back to Chicago because this is just, these Florida people are just crazy.
In Detroit, they throw real octopi onto the ice. But here we throw plastic and rubber rats.
Yeah. And by the way, for anybody in our audience who's ever seen My Octopus Teacher, which is a great documentary, would be the last time you ever do that to an octopus, by the way, which is cruel and terrible.
Yeah, but it got eaten in the end. So
as long as it's, I will not say no to some good octopus sashimi.
But it's interesting about how you get to, it used to be American Airlines Arena, and then it was that
FTX
crypto thief who owned FTX. But it's interesting, getting to arenas is not easy.
Well, and think about the conversation we just had with Jeff Burkow, the idea of rapid transit and what that could do for things like sports in terms of that easing traffic congestion. Listen, I live in the northeast quarter of Miami. if there's a Heat game or a concert at that arena, going south on Biscayne, you don't even think about, because the traffic gets locked up. I mean, for hours and hours. And the idea of there being, better light rail, better rapid transit in the area, I mean, it's hugely appealing. I understand the arguments, for people who feel like it's going to affect their neighborhood in negative ways. But at the same time, for things like sports, I got to imagine that would be a huge improvement for everybody.
Big win.
Just being able to navigate. Look, I mean, it's funny, we talk about at the beginning of the show, we talk about flooding and traffic and all of that. And, it's one of those things we kind of accept as the result of the growth of the density in a place like Miami. But traffic is just, it's just misery. It's turned into absolute misery. I mean, I find myself looking for more and more reasons not to go to dense areas because the traffic is just impossible. And, and listen, Uber's doing great as a result of it.
Yeah, but it's very difficult. I could tell you that's one of the reasons I moved Haber Law to Wynwood and got out of downtown. I did that. The vision for that was 10 years ago, before downtown was as insane as it is now. And I realized that the future for my office was not downtown.
Right.
It was getting away from downtown, getting away from the parking and the traffic of downtown. And so my commute is across Venetian Causeway from Miami Beach to Wynwood.
Right.
And, you're going to find a lot more. And Jeff talked about this, about not only live local, but these rapid transit zones where, and the interesting thing he said is, you're not going to get the federal funds unless you have the ridership. Mm-hmm. And if you don't develop in these areas, you're not going to get the ridership. So really, responsible development in those areas is a critical component of getting rapid transit paid for in part by the federal government.
Right.
Really an interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at neighborhoods like Wynwood, they are the result of getting people into an area that may not be, there was not necessarily a push into Wynwood, but it was peripheral to other development and growth. And then you activate these areas that nobody would, listen, and I'm sure David would reinforce for you, but for my friends and family who have lived in Miami most of their lives, the idea that Wynwood is what it is now was inconceivable 20 years ago. It was inconceivable that it could ever be what it is now. And now Wynwood, again, we're hearing that Wynwood's about to go vertical in a meaningful way, right? And high rises in Wynwood. And that, again, it's like the evolution right now in South Florida is so fast. Wynwood has finally sort of just settled into itself after this massive boom in development. And now it's evolving already.
Yeah, but you have, I could tell you that near my office, you had 10 cranes going on with residential, multifamily development, office development. It's crazy how they've built, they're building it up. It's fantastic. It's 8-story buildings, and it's restaurants, and it's bars, and it's incredible. It's a destination that people want to live in, work in, and people want to come and visit.
Right. What I think is really cool about Miami, and being somebody who loves great food and loves to eat, the Miami.
That's why I can't go out to dinner with you, because it's too expensive. Because you like to go to those fancy restaurants.
Miami has, if you knew all the ways, and everything he just said is inaccurate, but
it sounded good.
Miami's become a great food city, almost overnight. When I moved to Miami 20 years ago, Miami was a terrible food city. It was hard to find a restaurant that was not a legacy restaurant like a Joe Stone Crabs that
Miami
was worth going to.
Was good. It's not quite the taste of Chicago, but
listen, but again,
it's good.
But there's youth. There's youth. Yes, absolutely. And
forget your deep dish pizza.
It's not the pizza casserole.
They do have good Italian food in Chicago.
There's a ton of great food in Chicago. There's a ton of great food in New York. But I think what Miami has done that's impressive is it's been so fast. And it's attracted star chefs. It's attracted small upstarts.
But don't you think a lot of that has to do with New Yorkers moving down here and the demand for quality food, and the chefs from New York and LA
absolutely
coming here and going, we can be successful in Miami.
Yes, and they've proven that they can. I think what's going to be really interesting is one of the things, again, that we were talking with Jeff a little bit about, but I think is pertinent to all of us, is a little of the decentralization theory that you talked about. Is that sort of these outcroppings of towns, if you will, that are turning into little micro cities. We talked about Aventura, we talked about Doral. It's always been a little bit of the case.
Even Coral Gables, in that Douglas area.
Absolutely.
And then, the Dadeland area. And you're going to see more of this.
Right.
And if these rapid transit zones could really, get moving, you're going to see it going out west also. You're going to see it in West Kendall, and you're going to see it out 836 if they can build these areas. It'll be interesting. I think it's really because you can't just keep having everybody come to downtown Miami.
Right. No, and there's clearly already a movement. I think to the point we've been making all episode is, how do you then ensure that you can continue to develop? Because if I put 2 and 2 together and we talk about what we talked about with Jeff and we talked about what we talked about at the start of the show, and it's not to sound defeatist, but absent some of those changes, absent what you talked about in terms of governments agreeing with one another and not just getting out of each other's way, but getting out of the way of progress, there is a wall, right? There is a wall moving at us. And, I think it's great to get educated on what the solutions are, and that actually that already have some of their own momentum, but realizing that local and state government can be a kill switch if not managed correctly. And I think, we're going to have a lot of great politicians on this show and coming up in the near future. And I think one of the things that, is front of mind for me is what the political maturation of South Florida looks like. I mean, South Florida takes a lot of heat for behaving like a young city, that politicians, don't necessarily have the same orientation they do in some of the other large metropolis cities along the eastern seaboard, and that now that we are a metropolis, we have to start behaving like one.
I want to make a shout out to Mayor Howard Weinberg.
Absolutely.
That heroes thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, what a brilliant. I'd like to get him on the show, and I would also like to get a politician or two from Broward and Palm Beach to talk about the interaction between the counties.
Right.
Because
what that perspective is from the outside.
Yeah, because I think that this is Sun, Sand, and Sold is not just Miami. It's all of South Florida. And Palm Beach, the downtown Palm Beach office market. Haber Law just opened a Fort Lauderdale and a Palm Beach office. And I could tell you we were able to get space easily in Fort Lauderdale. Space in downtown Palm Beach is very expensive, and it's very sought after right now because a lot of the companies are moving there as well. So I'd like to get them here also to talk about their perspective and how they see their counties expanding and how they deal with the east-west growth as well as the transportation, quality of life, what they think of live local, what they think of, these same infrastructure issues. So that's a hope that we'll be able to, get some of those people here as well.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Well, thanks again for joining us on Sun, Sand, and Sold. We will see you in the next episode. And thanks for our sponsors, who we'll hear a word from now.
Go Panthers.